economic development and leadership. It was roughly about 35 years ago that I had an opportunity to meet an individual who left a resounding impact on me. That individual taught me so much with respect to economic development at a community level, and the desire to move forward with positive processes. I wanted to state that this individual, when I sat down with him and talked to him, he took that time, he took that leadership initiative to sit down and talk to me about economic development and what it meant for his community. I asked him how he had become so successful at his community level, and he says, well, George, you have to understand, we don't have tourism out here. He comes from a small community, roughly about 250 people. He says, we didn't have tourism, we don't have mining activity happening, we don't have lakes, and we're not in a pristine environment like mountains or a beautiful area where people flock to. He says, and we don't have land that we can lease out. He said, so I had to look at this from a whole different perspective. And the reason that this individual left such a resounding impact on me was that this person actually was extremely successful in the white man's world off reserve. And as I'll kind of relate to that, he talked to me a bit about, economic development and that we as the communities, the First Nations community, the bands across Canada, he says they all were given this economic bus. He says, I'm going to put it to you in simple terms. We were all given an economic development bus. He says, as I go from community to community to community, he says, I see these beautiful buses. And he says, and as we pull into the community, I see, chiefs behind the wheel waving at me, and he says, and they got everybody on board with the bus. And he says, in other communities I'll see, counselors waving at me from behind the wheel. And he says, and other communities I see community economic development people waving at me from the bus. He says, as we pull through the community and leave the community, he says, the one thing I see is that they don't know how to get the bus out of park. And I looked at him and kind of said, okay. He says to me, he said, I learned at an early age, I'm not a bus driver. I hired a bus driver. I'm the leader, the navigator, the visionary. I tell him where we want to go. He drives me there. That's the big difference. And he says, he said, all those communities that we went to and that I've been involved in, he said, really have a lot going for them. It's just they are afraid to take it out of park. And maybe they just don't know how. So with that, I wanted to really relate to and acknowledge that the person I'm talking about, the late great Walter Twin, left a resounding impact on me. And he taught me so much with respect to economic development and community development. And, he's left a legacy for his band.